Hi, I'm Lynn Ulbricht. I'm here to talk about my son, Ross Ulbricht, who's the defendant in the Silk Road case. I came to introduce people to who Ross really is, as opposed to what you may read in the media, and also to talk about how this case is bigger than Ross and how it affects all of us and our future. It also includes a special message from Ross, and it's something that, this case is something that will impact all of us. And that's what I really want to get across. It's not just about one man and one family, but it's something that will impact law going into the 21st century. And I'm wanting to convey that in my talk. I'm Lynn Ulbricht. Here I am with my family on a family reunion last September in California. I'm with my husband, Kirk, my daughter Callie, and my son Ross. 2 weeks later, Ross was arrested for being the creator and operator of the Silk Road website. And my life was changed forever. The fact that I'm standing here talking to you is proof of that. Before I start, I wanted to make a couple of disclaimers. I think probably everyone in this place is more technologically savvy than I am. I got my first smartphone last September as a hand-me-down for my daughter. I didn't even want it. I had rarely been on Facebook. I had never been on Twitter. I certainly had not heard of Tor or PGP or encryption. I had heard of Bitcoin barely. I'm waiting for somebody to come out with a darknet for dummies, but I haven't found that yet, so bear with me. I'm also not an attorney, and I don't have any inside information about the case because I don't have attorney-client privilege, and so I can't have inside information. However, I have taken 69 pages of what our Ross's lawyer has written and distilled it down to 9 pages, and he approved those pages. So I feel like I have a pretty good grasp of that, and I want to share that with you. There is something that I am an expert on, however, and that's this person, my son Ross. Now, you might have heard of a sadistic thug who casually orders murders for hire. I don't know who that person is, or even if he actually exists, but I do know that it is not my son, Ross. Ross is, oh, and by the way, he doesn't talk like a character in a bad cop show. Ross is kind, compassionate. He's one of the most nonviolent people you'll ever meet. He loves life. He has very high standards, and he lives by those, even when it's hard. He's known for his integrity, his honesty, his trustworthiness. He's very intelligent. But he's also, and he's never arrogant about it, but he's also a lot of fun, loves to play, very enthusiastic about life. Here he is getting ready for a backpacking trip. Ross loves being outside. He hasn't been outside in 9 months. I know he would just love being here with you guys and camping and having great talks. All week I've been thinking, oh God, I wish Ross were here. He would just love this. Ross also is someone who has time for everyone, no matter their age, their status, their wealth or lack of it, their education or lack of it. He just treats everyone as an individual and always makes time for them. I read an anecdote in the New York Times about him, actually, where he and a friend, his roommate from San Francisco, were walking down the street, and suddenly Ross was running off. And he looked up and saw him helping an old homeless woman across the street. And that does not surprise me a bit. That is very typical of something Ross would do. This is a rose that Ross sent me for my birthday from prison. He fashioned it out of toilet paper. And for me, it is a symbol of how Ross will make something positive and beautiful about anywhere he is, even in a grim place like MDC Brooklyn, and it is a grim place. He's always positive. When he calls me, you know, I'll say, "How are you doing?" He goes, "I'm good, Mom, I'm good." He never complains. He tells me about the yoga class he taught in prison, or now he's teaching a physics class. He's got 8 regulars. One time in the visiting room, we all sit at a long table, inmates on one side, families on the other. And this one inmate turned to me and he goes, "Ross is a really good person, and I'm looking out for him," which I was really glad of because he looked like a really tough guy, and I was like, good. So, but you know, I know, I'm his mother. I'm going to say good things about Ross. But I invite you to go to our website. We have a page of testimonials, over 50 of them, with people who've written in talking about how Ross has influenced their life, been a role model, contributed to their life. There's a story of one kid. He said he was kind of an unpopular kid and he called himself a social liability. And he said, but Ross befriended him and inspired him and encouraged him and continued to do that through their friendship. And now that same person has helped us with our website because he just loves and admires Ross so much, wants to help. Another wrote in about how Ross drove 300 miles to rescue him when he was stranded. Another one wrote in about how he caught a bee and threw it in a freezer to kill it, and Ross rushed over to the freezer, liberated the bee, and scolded him for being cruel. And the friend said, "That's when I knew Ross was one of the kindest people I've ever known." He really sounds like a killer, doesn't he? Ross, some people say, you know, I've never heard anyone say a bad word about Ross. Another person wrote in and said, Ross is one of those rare lights in the world. For me, Ross is a son worth fighting for. So I told you our lives had changed dramatically, to say the least, when Ross was arrested. And I just want to tell you a little bit about how that happened. Ross was arrested on October 1st, and we found out October 2nd. It was a normal day. I walked in my husband's home office, and I found him slumped over with his head in his hands. And I'm like, what's going on? What's happened? And he said, Ross has been arrested. At that point, I went into shock. The next thing I remember, I'm on the phone with a Reuters reporter, very nice woman, who's filling me in on the whole thing and the charges and everything. And I'm like, this is impossible. Ross is a stellar person. He would never hurt anyone. That morphed later, she quoted me correctly, that morphed later into he never meant to hurt anyone, which has become typical of what happens in the media when things get passed around. So, she warned me we'd be bombarded by media, and were we ever. It was like a tsunami hit our family. And in fact, ever since, I feel like I've been on a wave, on a little raft going like this, trying to just stay afloat with all of this going on, you know, propelling me forward to where I am right now with you. But anyway, suddenly the phone's ringing off the hook, reporters are knocking on our door, camera crews are going by our house, our little neighborhood is just freaking out. We turn on any media and there's Ross, and they're talking about Ross. And it was just absolutely mind-blowing. Meanwhile, Ross was in Oakland, California in solitary confinement, where he would remain for the next month and a half in either Oakland or New York. They kept him in solitary and segregated housing. This is someone who has no prior record of anything, certainly no violence. Month and a half in solitary. Anyway, in all the craziness and chaos, we realized our priority needed to be to find Ross the best possible lawyer. And we got a lot of recommendations, 2 of whom were dead. So, you know, I was kind of hoping for a lawyer that was alive. But anyway, and one name kept coming up, and it was Joshua Dratel. And we had also reached out to EFF, and they got back to us. They were helping us find someone that would work with us financially because, contrary to what you may have heard, we're not rich, we have no hidden wallet, we have no Bitcoin. Ross has absolutely nothing. He relies on us to donate to his commissary so he can eat well. So they were trying to find a lawyer that would be flexible and work with us that way, and they called back and said, we have someone who will talk to you. It's Joshua Draytell. So we got on the phone with Josh and explained the situation, and he agreed to work with us and be flexible. And we agreed that we would do what we could to compensate him fairly by raising money, our own money, of course, whatever we could do. This case is a mountain of work. It is very complex, and they are putting in tons of work on it. We also asked him, how do you feel about personal liberty and individual rights? And he said, I've been working for those things my entire career. And so we said, okay, done deal. We made a deal right there on the phone, and got off the phone and started jumping for joy, hugging each other, because we felt that if we had a good attorney, Ross stood a chance. At that point, I'm like, you know what? Let's just take a break. Let's go have margaritas and celebrate. And we did. It was just like, oh, stress. Okay. So the next thing we decided was that we needed to relocate near to where Ross is. We were in Austin, Texas. And so we liquidated a lot of our things, gave things away, packed up the rest. Here we are on our way to the storage unit. Put everything in a 10 by 20 and hit the road. For January of 2014, weather we were not used to at all, but anyway. And Ross headed for this cozy place in Brooklyn, MDC Brooklyn. Guys, it's a transitional facility. Guys that come here from prison go, I want to get back to prison. This place is really a dump. I mean, it's pretty grim. And our next priority became raising bail to get him out of there. And we were hopeful, murderers, rapists, child pornographers, all kinds of violent people get bail every day of the week. We figured we had a chance. In addition, we got over 70 letters attesting to Ross's character to present to the judge. This was a record number. Our attorney in his career had never seen so many. And in addition to that, 27 people, not wealthy people, stepped forward and pledged houses, business equity, life savings, money, property, pledged that towards Ross's bail. And we raised $1 million in pledges. And the thing about bail is, if Ross skips bail, they not only lose their pledge, but if they sign the bond, they are responsible for the entire bond, $1 million. And I heard over and over again, hey, no worries. We know Ross. He's a man of his word. He would never burn us like that. We don't even worry about it. We're not even concerned, which says a lot about who Ross is. So we went into the bail hearing hopeful and got our first taste of how the prosecution operates. What Josh said is that they operate by ambush. They wait until the last minute and then present whatever they're going to present, which deprives the defendant of an opportunity to rebut. No rebuttal. And that's what they did. There were 2 murder for hire charges out there, and the night before the bail hearing, they submitted 4 more to Joshua Draytell, who had no opportunity to discuss them with Ross or anything. Then what happens in a bail hearing is each side submits its written information. And then they have an opportunity for oral arguments just to supplement, not to rehash what's in there. Well, the prosecutor, Saren Turner, apparently did not get that memo. And he went on to put on quite a performance and was admonished by the judge 4 times and just continued on. And he looked over at Ross, who was sitting peacefully. I mean, if you saw Ross, he's just a very peaceful, tranquil person. And he goes, that man is dangerous. That man is a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. That man's family doesn't know him. He's dangerous. I mean, I'm talking a real performance. And he's playing to the room. It's full of media. Well, they reported it. Suddenly Ross all over the world is dangerous, deprived of bail. And yet, 2.5 months later, that same prosecutor in court in New York at Ross's arraignment did not indict him for one single charge of murder for hire. Now, if it's serious enough to deprive a man of bail and serious enough to be so dangerous, why didn't they indict him for it? Don't know. They did mention it under another count, narcotics trafficking, what's called an uncharged crime. Now, I never knew that this thing existed because I figured if it's a crime, you charge. If it's not a crime, you don't charge. But it's an uncharged crime. It conveniently does not require any proof, and it just sits there, not part of the indictment. There is another indictment that was there from the beginning in Maryland. They're not doing much with that right now because it's all being handled in New York. I expect it to go the way of the others personally. So, another obstruction by the prosecution that we have suffered is that at that same arraignment, the judge was very concerned that Ross get access to evidence and be able to take part in his own defense and participate in what's called discovery. And that means they have to submit the evidence to Ross, and they have on 2 CDs. However, that was February. By the time I left for here, 5 months later, he did not have a laptop with software that could read it. No access. He actually did call me while I was here and said, well, I finally got a laptop. Now we're not sure if he's going to have time, if they're going to allow him time in the prison to read it, and we may have to go back to court for that. You know, this is not a basketball game where you run out the clock and so your opponent can't score. This is a man's life and his liberty. And his trial date is November 3rd, and time's a wasting. And this is what's going on. He should have had that laptop with and be able to read his discovery a long time ago. So after the indictment, what happens is the defense gets to challenge the indictment. And our lawyer submitted 50 pages of pretrial motions that do that. And another lawyer on his blog said, what these motions reveal is the inadequacy of existing law to understand, define, or stay apace with technology. And I think I can show you in this talk that this case is a lot more about Ross than about just Ross and Silk Road. So whether you think Ross is a hero or a villain, or you think Silk Road is a great free market experiment or an evil enterprise, is one thing. How they are using the law in this case is very alarming to me. So this is not about guilt or innocence or anything. It's just the indictment. That comes later. Another thing that comes later is the government's methods and how they found the server, if what they did was legal. Considering all the revelations we've had about the NSA and parallel construction, these may be very reasonable questions, but that comes later, as well as whether or not Ross is guilty or innocent. But what they're doing here, and I'll show you, is that they're taking laws that address the physical world and applying them, forcing them onto the virtual world and activity. So it's like forcing a square peg into a round hole. So here we go. First count, narcotics trafficking. Now, to be guilty of this, you have to have bought, sold, or possessed drugs. They're not alleging that Ross did that. They're alleging that he provided a platform where other people bought and sold drugs. This is called transferred intent. One person's intention and action, one person is guilty for the intentions of action of others. And the indictment relies very heavily on this throughout. I'll show you more later. Well, Josh Dratel says this is unprecedented and extraordinarily expansive. It expands criminal liability. I mean, that's obvious. If you're responsible for yourself and someone else, expands your criminal liability. The next count is the continuing criminal enterprise or the kingpin charge. This has specific definitions as well. You have to have organized, managed, or supervised a specific number of people in a criminal enterprise, usually drugs. They're not saying Ross did that. They're saying he was the owner and operator of Silk Road. Also in this count, they're very vague. They talk about a series of violations and certain narcotics laws, but they don't specify a single one. They go, well, no, there's hundreds of thousands, but they don't specify one. It's very vague. Next, computer hacking conspiracy. Well, to be guilty of this, you actually have to get into and hack into a computer, a protected computer, without being authorized to do so. They're not saying Ross did that. They're alleging that he provided a platform where other people bought and sold software that might be used to hack into a computer. And then again, it could be used to legitimately, but it could be used to hack into it, so that means he's a hacker. A blatant example of transferred intent. Strikingly missing from that and the narcotics count is nothing about possessing, selling, buying, going into agreement with other people to do that. None of that, which is required by the statutes. The next one, final one, finally, the money laundering conspiracy. Well, the thing about that is it has to involve money. And of course, they're alleging he laundered Bitcoin. Now, there's a big argument about this, but the thing is, laws use words. Words have very specific definitions, and those definitions are crucial, especially in something like this. And there's a crucial distinction about what is money. Now, the government's having a big fight with itself about that. The IRS, of course, has formally and publicly declared that Bitcoin is property. The Supreme Court has repeatedly explained that the IRS is the ultimate authority on these interpretations. The Department of Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network agrees. They say virtual currency does not have legal tender status in any jurisdiction, period. But the prosecution goes, no, we don't need a definition. Everything should be funds. And Joshua said, well, that opens the door to calling bartering, any exchangeable property, funds. And then it makes it all liable to money laundering charges, which expands criminal liability to a lot more people. Very expansive. So, in summary, we have a bunch of gaps between statutes and allegations. And one lawyer said, if they have all this murder for hire on them, why do they have to contort the laws to get the guy? But anyway, that's another question. But they're trying to apply laws that are created for physical crime to a digital world. Now, they don't have the laws to address this case, as far as I can see. But then you'd have to go to the legislature, you'd have to make laws, it's really inconvenient, and hassle. I mean, separation of powers, what a pain. So much easier to just take a law and slap it on there and strong arm it on there, even if it doesn't fit. So, can they do this? Can they strong arm inadequate laws onto unmatching allegations? Well, they say they can, and they defend it. They say, and this is a quote from, this isn't writing, this is a quote from their papers, federal criminal laws are expansive and adaptable, especially when it comes to the internet. When I hear the government saying their laws are expansive, I get alarmed. It's alarming. And they also add in there, by the way, the arm of the law is far longer than Ulbricht imagines it to be. Very ominous. Very ominous tone, I thought. And I think our framers would agree with that, it was ominous. They wrote 4 of the first 8 amendments of the Bill of Rights to keep that arm from overextending itself. Yeah. And guaranteeing rights for the criminally accused, because they were dealing with prosecutorial overreach with the British, and they wanted to make sure it didn't happen here. So the prosecution may say, oh, come on, that's so 1790, But we do still have a Constitution. It still does have a Fifth Amendment. That Fifth Amendment does still have a due process clause, and that due process clause says laws cannot be expansive or broadly applied. Prosecutors can't rewrite or expand statutes at whim. Okay, well, then the government says, we're not required to use technical precision or specify alleged violations. Well, again, we have the Fifth Amendment with its due process clause, and that says not specifically naming essential and specific elements of a charge is prohibited. In addition, the Sixth Amendment says charges must be clear and specific. It's not something that can morph and grow and change just because of the whim of some prosecutor. How do you defend yourself against that? The Circuit Court agrees. An indictment must specifically describe a particular criminal act, not just a type of crime. So general charges like, oh, kingpin, can't simply be thrown at somebody. They have to specifically say how it fits the statute. There's also something called the void for vagueness doctrine, which the Supreme Court calls the first essential of due process of law. It's a serious thing. And it says specific acts must be identified and match what the law describes, or else it's void because it's vague. And as I pointed out before, in the kingpin charge, series of violations, certain crimes, very vague. Then there's the rule of lenity. This says that ambiguity in a law is construed in favor of the defendant. So if there's any question or lack of clarity, the defendant gets the benefit of the doubt. Now, I don't know what's less clear than trying to take laws that are constructed for the physical world and apply them to the virtual world. There's tons of ambiguity. Then they say, no, charges don't have to match the law's definitions. Well, besides the void for vagueness, which says it specifically, Fifth Amendment, due process say an allegation must meet the precise description in the law. Now, in this case, they're very big on redefining things. The co-conspirator, they redefine that as, well, pretty much, it's very broad, and you can have a very tangential association with a crime, and if they say you're a co-conspirator, well, you are a co-conspirator. They stretch the definitions of organize, manage, and supervise in the kingpin charge. Their description sounds like any website host, the way they describe it. They define users of Silk Road as Ross's business partners. Now, I would love to be Google's business partner, but I don't think they're going to go for it just because I use their site. They also say a website host is liable for the criminal activity of site users. Well, that's transferred intent, so we discussed, and they completely dodged the question. And again, Josh Draytell says it's unprecedented and extraordinarily expansive. So, in summary, we have the government in this case. Hey, our laws are expansive and adaptable. We're not required to use specific charges or technical precision. We don't have to match definitions, and one person's responsible for the actions of another. So, on the subject of transferred intent, just a little bit about that. In the 80s, Congress passed the Communications Decency Act, specifically Section 230, to prevent transferred intent. To prevent, say, Craigslist for being held liable for murders that were arranged on Craigslist, or eBay for stolen goods on eBay. And this is true even if the host promoted illegal activity. In civil court, they were not responsible for actions on their site. The prosecution relies very heavily on this theory of transferred intent in direct opposition to the spirit of what Congress passed in the Communications Decency Act and wanted to prevent. Now, it is true that it only applies to civil. If Ross were in a civil court case for the exact same conduct, he would be immune. But because it's a criminal case, he's up for, looking at some pretty serious stuff. Our lawyer says that this inconsistency is arbitrary, discriminatory enforcement. And the government says, well, that gap, no biggie, no problem, because you can trust us to not abuse the system. They actually did say that. Our lawyer says, look, this could set precedent. No website host has ever been held liable for the actions on the site. And he says it creates a dangerous anomaly in which ISPs and other web hosts could face greater exposure in criminal cases in the future. That they could use this as a foot in the door. And they already told us their laws were expansive and adaptable, remember? So I don't see why that isn't a valid concern. If that happened and website hosts were fearful of what was of criminal liability, I would imagine that it would put a chill on the internet and stifle creativity and free expression on the internet. That's, it seems to me that that could happen. So, and so there are larger issues at play here than just Silk Road and one man. And the question is, how can they use this? How can they use this case? Well, they can pave the way for new laws and interpretations. Josh Ray tells that it's traditional for them to use high-profile cases to make bad law. Cases that would impact internet privacy. In their papers, they already said that people who want privacy, for instance, Tor users, have criminal intent just by the fact that they use Tor. So they're already looking at privacy. Internet autonomy. How much are they going to regulate and become involved in that based on precedent set in this case? Digital currency. This is probably going to be the first pushback and challenge to the government, their attempt to stretch the money laundering statute to target Bitcoin. Web host liability we discussed already. Legal definitions, expanding definitions and consequently expanding liability, casting a much larger umbrella over more people, making more of us criminals. So basically, government expansion. Now, I'm an older woman. I've lived much of my life, and it will affect me, but a lot of you here are young, and this is your future. I believe we're at a crossroads here. We're in uncharted territory. This has not been addressed in the courts. This case will impact which way we go and what kind of future we're going to have and what kind of internet we're going to have. It's big. Ross sent me this picture of himself about a week ago. It was taken a couple weeks ago in prison. I guess sometimes they go around and take pictures for the families. And he sent me a message for you that I want to read from prison. Hi, PorcFest, this is Ross. The first thing they tell you when they arrest you is that what you say will be used against you, and they mean it. So I have to keep this brief. I'd just like to thank you for giving my mom, Lynn, the chance to tell you about the situation I'm in and why the outcome of this legal battle will have a lasting impact on you and the rules you live under in this country. One thing I've learned since beginning my tour of the federal criminal justice system is that these guys are not all powerful. Precedent can be set that will limit their ability to infringe on our rights. I urge you to stand by me and do what you can to turn this horrible situation into a win for us. I wish I could be there with you, but of course I can't. But with your help, though, I'll see you at PorcFest 2015. I've told Ross when he's called about the support I've gotten here, and he's so encouraged and uplifted by it. I'm so grateful, so great. So we're up against a Goliath here. And we need an army of Davids to come alongside us. Our team is working so hard for us. It's a very small team. Our lawyers and I and some family members and friends who've stepped up. And it's a mountain of work. So we need you to come alongside us and help, not just for Ross and us, but for all of us. And you'll be in good company. And you want to do what this guy says, right? We have a poster campaign that we're getting people to take pictures of themselves and post them around the internet. We've had them come from Moscow, from Australia, from Costa Rica, and of course around the States. We just want to get that going. Around the room, we have posters that'll go right to Bitcoin and Bitcoin account. Every little bit helps. As I said, you'll be in good company. Here's Jeffrey Tucker. He's speaking after I do. We're at a Bitcoin conference in Austin. They gave me flowers. It was so sweet. Here's John Bush. He's spoken at some panels here. You've probably seen him, another friend. Harlan Dietrich of Brave New Books, who couldn't be here, but we have a Brave New Books table, and he encouraged me. He told me about this, encouraged me to come, and he's also the force behind our Indiegogo campaign. We have a goal of $20,000. Appreciate help meeting that goal. There's T-shirts, and right there, you can get a cool T-shirt like this, and there they are, and other great things, bundles. Prizes. So we do that. And again, we take Bitcoin. We set a goal of, for PorcFest, 60 Bitcoin. Well, ambitious. But a friend calculated, well, if each person gave 0.03, we'd do it. So anyway, whatever you can give, though, is really appreciated. And, we also take PayPal. Write us a check, give us cash. We actually got a silver bullet while I was here, so, Please visit our free Ross community page and like us and comment and make us a presence there. Follow us on Twitter. I'll follow you. See, I'm learning all this. I'm getting up to speed here. Then there's our website where you can connect with all of this. And we know not everybody can give a lot of money. We always need money, but we need ideas. We need contacts, help with social media, cryptographers. We've got a lot of stuff to decrypt. Anybody who has legal knowledge or help, we welcome all of that. And you can contact us through the website. You'll get me, so just email us. So here we are. I love this quote, again by Scott Greenfield. He has a blog called Simple Justice. Because the lawyers are watching this case. It's interesting to read what they say about it. And what he says is, this case is the birth of law as applied to our digital future. Watch it as a spectator at your peril. This is a big thing. And you don't have to be a spectator. You can participate. And when you consider that this is a battle what's at stake here, this is a battle worth fighting. And I want to just close by saying thank you, and that it is my deepest hope and my most fervent prayer that, like Ross said, next PorcFest, it will be him that is here with you, celebrating as a free man. And that will be a victory, not just for Ross and our family, but for all of us. Thank you. Ross.